Merry Christmas, everyone. Are you ready for my 7th attempt at reading this stupid story? Actually, it's my phone that's being stupid, but that's beside the point. Anyway, let's go. The three in question are declared guilty of highest treason and are hereby banished to reality. The verdict was met with murmurs of disbelief from everyone in the hall, except for the three accused brothers. The brothers stood in accepting silence. One of the brothers smirked as if he expected the judge to declare the entire proceeding to be a practical joke. After all, they were heroes. The other two simply looked at each other and shrugged in resignation. What had they expected? They had slaughtered over half of the High Council. For the good of the race or not, they were murderers. Reality was their fate. Quaz stood silently and solemnly beside his brothers, staring at the orb which sat between them. The flat sphere shook, already beginning to crack under the pressure of its own impossibility. The newly appointed head of the council droned on about how the brothers would be examples. No one listened. Instead, the crowd pressed in to try to witness the unspeakable fate which had befallen only one other. As the speech carried on, the crowd's murmuring grew louder until one voice suddenly cut across them all, a voice from directly next to Quaz. It was Zos. "Enough!" he cried, exasperated. "We may not die as heroes, but we're sure as hell not dying cowards." With that, Zos brought his heel down on the orb, and it exploded. Quaz felt the impact in his chest, felt himself falling, but he never felt himself hit the ground. He just kept falling, shooting through the flow of the dimension, falling until consciousness was ripped away from him. Crack! 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 The brothers hit the horizon, instantly snapping to their place in reality, the place they had left from on their last fateful trip through time. Time. Quaz felt it strange to perceive its passing, a sensation he had forgotten. He looked around, expecting to see the capital city they had left behind. Instead, he stood in a field of golden grain which tore at his mind to look at. In fact, although his brothers looked the same as they had, everything else seemed to have the flat impossibility of the sphere which had brought them here. A moment passed, as they tried and failed to orient themselves before any of them spoke. Finally, it was Akaj who spoke for the first time since he had walked into the council with intent to kill. "When do you think we're at?" he asked. "Who knows?" Zos shrugged. "It could be 23 Alpha, going by the house over there," Quaz commented, pointing to the wood cabin at the edge of the field. "Last I checked, 23 Alpha didn't hurt to look at," Zos growled. "So it's a lost quantum world," Quaz offered. "Don't you remember how everything looked too big for itself when we first descended?" Akaj asked. "I think we're just experiencing the opposite effect, now that we've fallen." "Hopefully we get over it, then," Zos griped. "If Akaj is right," Quaz began, but Akaj cut him off. "Wait, what's this?" He had stared in one direction long enough to finally focus. He cupped his hands in the air, staring even closer. Suddenly, a flame appeared in his hands, only to disappear when he jumped back in surprise. "What was that?" Zos demanded reflexively. I'm not sure yet," Akaj said slowly. "Hold on. Let me try again." He cupped his hands again, and ice began to materialize. This time, however, instead of disappearing, when he pulled his hands away, the chunk of ice fell to the earth, shattering on the soft dirt. "So?" Quaz and Zos both prompted. I'm still not sure. It's like I can see what things are made up of and control them." Quaz and Zos looked at each other in confusion as Akaj reached out once again. But this time, instead of something appearing, he began to raise the dirt from the ground, forming it until it was as smooth and glassy as forming it until it was smooth and glassy. It shifted from brown to pastel blue. Finally it shattered, falling to the ground in a fine green mist. Akaj looked up grinning. "Well," he asked, "aren't you going to try?" After a moment's hesitation, Quaz reached out and began to understand. He couldn't see each atom, but he could sense the flow of dimensions through the space around him. He could create enough of a ripple in the streams to make a noticeable difference in reality. He mentally pushed, creating a breeze which rippled through the grain. Looking over, he saw that Zos had begun arcing electricity between his hands, sparks flying back and forth between his fingers. Their experimentation was cut short by the click of a cocking gun as a figure stepped through the stalks with a loud exclamation in a language they didn't understand. "Sorry, sir," Quaz began, before remembering that the ascended language had never been spoken under the horizon of reality. He started again in a tongue the stranger was more likely to know. "I'm sorry, we don't know when we've ended up." The farmer looked even more bewildered. "Do you really not know Time Standard dialect?" Zos asked. "Lost Earth for sure," he added to his brothers. Quaz began to agree, but suddenly noticed that he could sense the man's thoughts somewhere in the dimensional flow. He reached for it, and when he pulled his hand back, a pink pearl the size of a billiards ball had formed in his grasp. He stared at it for a moment before placing the shimmering object to his forehead. Immediately, Quaz's mind was flooded with a new vocabulary of thousands of words. He looked to either side and saw that his brothers had figured out what he had done and followed his lead. "Can you understand us now?" Quaz began a third time in the new language. Yes," the farmer trailed off. "Good." Zos jumped in. When are we?" "When?" the man echoed, trembling in bewildered confusion. "Yeah, when? Which Earth are we on?" "You're on Earth, the man finally replied. "Garrett, Indiana, if you're asking where you are." "Definitely a lost Earth," Akaj said to his brothers in their own language. "What are you anyhow?" the farmer cut in, gaining some of his own courage back. "Why are you glowing?" Quaz realized that if they looked normal to each other, they must appear as impossible to reality as reality appeared to them. Not sure how to deal with their appearance, he chose to focus on the first question. "We are Anakats. Mankind ascended beyond reality. No longer mere men, we are free to roam between the dimensions at will." "Or we were," Akaj added, so only his brothers heard. "I don't know who you think you are," the farmer replied angrily, raising his rifle to his shoulder, "but I don't like it. You playing with gods and science." "Would you just tell us when—" Quaz began in exasperation, but was muffled by something wrapping across his entire body as Akaj cut in. We're sorry, sir. We just thought our special effects would be a fun trick," Akaj said from a new form. A mortal form. Quaz realized that Akaj had forced all three of them, painfully, back into their pre-ascended bodies, dressed to match the style of the man in front of them. "Well, get your tricks out of my field," the farmer growled, but lowered his gun at the sight of three humans now standing before him. "Get back to the city and perform on a street corner with the prostitutes." "Actually," Akaj replied, "we got a little lost on our way out here, cutting through fields and all. If you could get us to the nearest store, we'll be on our way from there." "You can make a left out at the road if you want to find your way through the suburbs," the man sighed, "or you can go the other way back to town. You can take the highway that way if you're heading to the big city." They thanked the man and followed him back to his house, bidding him farewell as he admonished them one last time not to play with science they didn't understand. Once the brothers were alone, walking down the road, they began talking in their own language once more, agreeing that they should probably head toward the city. The instant they rounded the first bend, Zos and Quaz exploded out of the bodies Akaj had made for them. Sorry. "The hell was that about?" Quaz burst out. Zos whipped up the dust around them before blowing it at Akaj to show his own irritation. Sorry, but I had to get him to calm down, Akash apologized, still walking in his human form. As far as we know, we're still dead if we get shot. Besides, I wanted to see if I could do it. How did you pull that off? Quaz finally said begrudgingly. Guess I'm just figuring this stuff out fast, Akash shrugged. But you should probably learn how. We'll need to fit in. Zos and Quaz begrudgingly began trying to create their own bodies, whining the entire time about how much it hurt. It took both of them several tries, but eventually they were all walking down the dirt road in their flat, smothering mortal bodies once more. By the time they reached the highway, Zos had changed his hair color 24 times, finally settling on a sharp black, while Quaz and Akash toyed with their powers by challenging each other to create different materials. It wasn't until they reached the edge of the busy road that they realized that the farmer hadn't told them which way to go to get to the city. As they discussed their options, a black SUV slowed to a stop in front of them. The passenger side window rolled down to reveal a young man. "Hey guys," he greeted. "Where are you headed?" The big city," Hikaj offered. "If you're calling Fort Wayne a big city, then you country boys better hop in," the man smiled. "I'm Jake," he introduced himself. The brothers introduced themselves as well as they climbed into the back seat. "So, where are you from?" Jake asked. "We are members of the League's Earth 23 Beta branch and citizens of Sector 1. Any chance you can tell us when we are?" Quaz replied. "Stop. Oh, that's a new one," Jake chuckled. "Stop asking. We know this is a lost Earth, Quaz," Akaj admonished. "Look, I'm not sure what you're on, but if you'll slip me a little, I'll take it as payment for the ride." "What we're on?" Akaj asked. "You're clearly all high as kites," Jake replied. "Don't worry, I'm not a cop, boys." "We're not boys," Zos finally snapped, his body disintegrating. "We're gods among you!" Jake swerved in shock, bouncing the SUV off of another car before it veered off the side of the road and rolled several times. When the vehicle finally came to a stop, Akaj was the first to speak. "I guess the bullets wouldn't have been too big of a problem." He was looking down at where glass had lacerated his midsection, exposing his Anakat form, but apparently leaving it unharmed. Jake, on the other hand, Quaz trailed off, looking at the battered figure in the front seat, clearly dead. "Zos?" Akaj began. "Neither of you lecture me about this," Zos cut in, immediately pushing both of his brothers through the broken doors into the gathering crowd of concerned onlookers. Several people screamed and backed away as the two figures flew from the car. However, the brothers ignored them as Zos emerged, cycloning the flames of the wreck behind him. He no longer walked, but chose to float above the crowd as he addressed his brothers in the Anakat tongue. "Brothers, we were banished to this place. Why should we be further confined to pain and smothering in our own bodies? We have endless power here. We could rule these people." "Because we have the power to protect," Quaz replied. "We were heroes among the Anakats. We can be heroes again." "No, you see what heroics won us." Zos turned to the crowd, suddenly speaking English. "We are gods, and they will bow before us."